class. If you haven't read it, maybe you've heard about the book. It's a very evangelistic work. A fella and his wife were converted to Christ back in the 80s, and he kept a diary of his conversion. And it's just him telling the story of meeting a guy at work who wanted to study the Bible with him and on all the questions he had. And it's a great book, very simple to read. It's one of those few books that once you pick it up and get started, it's hard to put it back down because it just tells he tells the story in a very good way. You'll need a copy of the book to be in class. There's a sign-up sheet on the sign-up board in the foyer. I think the book's going to be around $15. It will not be over $15. And you'll definitely need a copy of the book to be in the class. And I just wanted to put a plug in. If you haven't signed up, you want to, go sign up, and we'll get you started. But expect two things. Expect to do some reading. And I hate to say this because I don't want to scare anybody off, but expect to do some memory work. One passage of your choosing every week. That's what we'll be doing in the class. And you'll see why we do that when we get started on the first day. All right, Luke chapter 14. Let's see here. I've marked all the passages I want us to use tonight, but where I was doing the marking, I left my notes. And so I have to look back and see exactly where we are going with this. We're going to read 1 through 14. That's it. Luke 14, 1 through 14. I need a reader for 1 through 6. Who'd like to read that for us? 1 through 6. Yes, Mark. He's got 1 through 6, 7 through 11. That's a very interesting sounding number. Okay, Corey and Lori, did I see your hand? You can have 12 through 14 if you will. All right, let's read.
One Sabbath, when Jesus went to eat in the house of a prominent Pharisee, who was being carefully watched, there in front of him was a man suffering from abnormal swelling of his body. Jesus asked the Pharisees and experts in the law, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not?" But they remained silent. So taking hold of the man, he healed him and sent him on his way. Then he asked them, "If one of you has a child or an ox that falls into a well on the Sabbath day, will you not immediately pull it out?" And they had nothing to say.
When he noticed how the guests picked the places of honor at the table, he told them this parable. When someone invites you to a wedding feast, do not take the place of honor, for a person more distinguished than you may have been invited. If so, the host who invited both of you will come and say to you, "Give this person your seat." Then, humiliated, you will have to take the least important place. But when you are invited, take the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he will say to you, "Friend, move up to a better place." Then you will be honored in the presence of all the other guests. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted.
And he also went on to say to the one who had invited him, "When you give a luncheon or a dinner, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or rich neighbors. Otherwise, they may also invite you in return, and that will be your repayment. But when you give a reception, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed, since they do not have the means to repay you. For you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous."
Very good. Now, if you're looking at verses 12 through 14, you can see how that fits very clearly in the context of what we're talking about tonight, helping the less fortunate. But you might be thinking about the first 6 verses and then 7 through 11. What exactly does that have to do with what we're talking about? How would you reason from the first 6 verses and what Luke writes about there about helping the poor? Or is there any reason to reason that from that text? Who would appreciate most what Jesus has done here? The guy that was sick. Everybody else there, not everybody else, but a lot of people there might be asking themselves questions about the law. Okay, is this right? I mean, it's the Sabbath day and he's healing on the Sabbath day. Who had no question about whether or not it was right to heal on the Sabbath day? One person for sure, 2 people I believe. The one for sure was Jesus. The other one, the guy that he helped. I don't think either one of them had any doubts. I think it's a good thing to heal on the Sabbath day. It's a good thing to be healed on the Sabbath day. So here was a man, doesn't say anything about his economic status, but there is a way in which he's poor. He was poor in health. Jesus had the means to do something about that, and Jesus did something about that. Nobody else there could have done what Jesus did, obviously. But when we get to verse 7, we start talking about things where, okay, there's a principle here in verse 7 through 11 that almost anybody could apply. What's he talking about in 7 through 11?
You're invited to a wedding feast. Don't sit in the most prominent place. You might be asked to leave for the lower place.
Okay, so we're back to the thing we studied earlier in this class, humility, humbling ourselves. Don't exalt yourself, humble yourself. And in this context, he says the likelihood is that if you humble yourself, you will be exalted. How much humility does it take of us to say, I'm going to stop, I'm going to take time, I'm going to take my means, I'm going to do something for somebody who can't repay me? I think that's what we're looking at here in 7 through 11. Verse 11, everyone who exalts himself will be humbled. Everyone who humbles himself will be exalted. And then he goes right into verse 12. What's he talking about in verse 12?
Don't just feed those who can feed you back.
Okay, you're going to have a banquet. You're going to have a feast. And maybe we don't have those necessarily like we might imagine them having them in this day. But what's the point? What's the application for us today in verses 12 through 14? Or is there one? Is this something that was cultural to the Jews and we don't really usually do that same kind of thing? So what's the point? How do we apply this?
Don't just do for those people that can do for you in return.
Yes. If we do for those who do for us and then they redo for us, what is our payment?
So they did what they did right.
Well, we already got it. Whatever they did for us in return is our payment.
But your reward for doing those who are less fortunate can't return the favor is greater in righteousness.
Okay. If hold to Luke 14 and go back for just a moment to Proverbs chapter 19, and somebody read verse 17. Who'll do that? Proverbs 19:17. One verse, and there are no unpronounceable kings' names. Okay, Jenny.
One who is gracious to a person lends to the Lord, and he will repay him for his good deed.
One who is what? Gracious to whom? To a poor man. What's he do? Lends to the Lord. You get that imagery in your mind? God, through his son Jesus Christ, spoke the universe into existence. Fashioned everything that was alive and gave it the power within itself to reproduce. So everything that is inanimate or animated in this world comes from God. And yet, here is an opportunity for little old you and me to lend something to God. That's how the Spirit of God inspired Solomon to put this down. We do something for someone who's poor, who can't repay us back, like Jesus is talking about. What we're actually doing is lending something to God. It's much like what we read last week from Matthew 25. Remember the judgment scene? Jesus separates the sheep and the goats, and he says to the sheep, "Come, you blessed of my Father, because when I was hungry, what'd you do? You fed me. When I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink." And what did they respond when he told them all those things? So when did we do this for you? And the response was, "Inasmuch as you did it to whom? One of the least of these, my brethren, you did it to me." So Jesus is saying when you do good to someone else, you're doing it to him. Proverbs is telling us the same thing. When you do good for those who are poor, you lend to the poor, or you give to the poor, you are lending to God. This is the only way I know that we can put God in our debt. I almost feel like that's blasphemous to say. But God is the one revealing this to us. It's like he says, Holy Spirit tells Solomon to tell everybody that they can put me in their debt by helping the people who are poor. I've got the resources. I want people to have compassion. I want people to have a heart to help. I want people to be not just sympathetic. Sometimes all you can be is sympathetic, but I want people to be empathetic when they can. What's the difference between sympathy and empathy? Joe, you had your hand up, but I don't think that's what you did.
It's for the right reason.
Okay, for the right reason, yes. Helping for the right reason. Will?
Sympathetic is something that you've never experienced, but you've never experienced, like I've never experienced pregnancy. I can be sympathetic to women, you know, in times when the things that they're going through. But I have gone through some traumatic things, so if I see somebody else go through the same things that I've gone through, I can have empathy.
Yes. Empathy is where you've gone through the same thing yourself. Sympathy is where you haven't, but you have an idea that it's bad. And your heart goes out to them because you can imagine what they must be going through. But empathy is when you know exactly what they're going through. That's one of the things that Jesus wants us to practice are those two things whenever we can. Now, Joe, what you were saying for the right reason. You want to elaborate on that? I don't want to just gloss over that. But
Whenever you do something for the least of these, you have to do it in the right spirit, not what you can get back.
okay.
It's where your heart is while you do it.
Right. I think that's the point that Jesus was making in Luke chapter 14, which also Paul learned from Jesus. And when Jesus wrote to the church at Corinth, he said if he did anything in chapter 13 without love, what good was it? Wasn't any good at all. In other words, you have to have the intent of love. Remember, as we studied love, that doesn't mean you have to have the feelings and the emotion. You have to have the intent. I'm doing this for you because I want to do you good. And it may only be because God told me so. Like when I was in service, I had some brothers in Christ, and we used to kid and tease each other all the time, and we would tell each other, I only love you because God says I have to. But the literal truth is that's real. Even if you don't have the emotion, you don't have the warm feeling of affection, you can still love someone, agape them, by doing good for them. And when you do that out of a sense of obligation to the Lord, faithfulness to God, obedience to God, even if you don't have the feelings, it's still out of love. Make sense? Discussion? Yes, Billy.
In Proverbs 19:17 here, and he who is gracious to a poor man lends to the Lord. The second part here, and he will repay him for his good deed. The Lord will repay you for your deed. Do you see that in a sense? It's because you're able to help somebody that God's going to bless you more, that you might be able to help somebody in the future?
What would we do for our children? I'm not trying to dodge your question. I'm just trying to maybe emphasize and refocus on the same idea. What would we do for our children if we see our children giving some of their things to others? You've provided toys for your child, and he meets a young child on the street that doesn't have any toys, and he goes and he gives some of his toys to that child. What are you going to do for your kid? You're going to take him to Walmart. Willie.
It's funny because that just happened with Savannah the other day.
Okay.
I gave her a piece of chocolate, just a little piece of chocolate, and she asked Daxton if he wanted some, and gave him the bigger part when she broke it off. Well, I saw her do that, and I didn't tell her to share that with Daxton, but because she shared it with Daxton, and that's something that I want to emphasize with her, I gave her another piece, and I told her that was a good job that you did sharing with Daxton, and I'm very proud of you. Here's a bigger piece, and you can enjoy this just for yourself.
All right. And did you give it to her because now you felt obligated? Well, now I have a sense of duty. I have to give my child some more candy because she gave, or was it?
I was happy that she did the right thing.
Exactly. Yeah. You're thrilled because she gets it. She understands this is the way we're supposed to live with each other. And when God sees us doing that, I think is what God is teaching us here in Proverbs as well as in Luke 14. When we have a compassionate heart and we're willing to make a sacrifice to help somebody else, he's going to make sure that doesn't go unpaid. He's going to be thrilled to do something for us in response to that. Now, each of us are limited in one way or another. None of us have all the time in the world. None of us have all the money in the world. None of us have all the opportunity in the world. And so as we have opportunity, even if you can't throw a feast, there might be something that you could do if you think deliberately about it. Because feasts don't happen by accident. Somebody has to plan a feast. They have to say, let's have a feast. I think that'd be a great idea. Let's pick a date on the calendar. We're going to take so much money and buy so much food, plan for so many people. In other words, it's something you do deliberately. What would happen in our lives if we decided every week we're going to deliberately plan, we're going to deliberately do something for someone else that can't pay us back? I just wonder what that would be like. And if that would be pretty close to following the scriptures. Because opportunities might not come up. Oh, sure, if somebody asked me for money, I might give them some money. But what about giving something to someone without waiting for them to ask for it? Just someone that you know is in need and could really use it. I never will forget. This is one of those stories that you go, oh. But when I was preaching for the church in Carbondale, in Tulsa, when you go into Tulsa on 44, Carbondale Church of Christ building is right on the north side of the road there. Preached there for 6 years. And we were going to make a trip from there to West Virginia, visit my mom years ago. I had a little Nissan Stanza wagon. Neatest little car in the world. It was a boxy, kind of an ugly thing, but it was neat when you got inside of it. It had all kinds of perfect room, and it was a front-wheel drive, so the floor was completely flat, and the kids could get in there and play because they were little, and you didn't have to worry about car seats back then. Anyway, I better get off of that before. Anyway. The Sunday before we were going to leave on Monday, one of the elders came to me and said, Marty, I hope you guys have a good trip. Put his hand out, and I shook his hand, and there was a $100 bill in it. I said, what's this? His name was JC. It was almost like Jesus Christ, but that was his initials, JC. And he said, I just wanted to give you a little something you might need on your trip. So, well, thank you. I learned a long time ago, when somebody wants to give you something, just be gracious and take it, because it is more blessed to give than to receive. But if we are not willing to humble ourselves and receive, what's the biggest reason we tell somebody, no, I can't accept a gift from you? Pride. I'm too proud. I'm not going to take that from you. You might think you're doing something for me. Well, you are doing something for me. Take the money. Give them the opportunity to be blessed. I got to finish my story now, Norma, because it gets better. We go to West Virginia, visit my mom. We turn around, come home, and we're leaving. And I think it was a Sunday afternoon. And the car, you know what that's like when you're on the road with your family, and you're driving along and this is not good. So pulled into a station. There was just happened to be one there. I pulled into it, and the guy was pulling the door down. He was closing. I said, man, I don't know what's wrong with my car, but something's wrong. And he said, well, I'm getting ready to go home, and let me take a look at it. He took a look at it, put a tester on it, and said, well, your diode's bad in your alternator. You're not going to make it if you don't fix that. And, well, can you do something for me? He said, yeah, I can take care of that. Let me call my friend and just see if he's got one. He called his buddy, worked at a junkyard. Said, yeah, he's got one. Let me go down there and get it. And he came back in about 20 minutes with the part, fixed it in, I don't know, maybe an hour. And I said, oh boy, what's this going to cost? He said, it's $97 and some odd cents. I whipped out a $100 bill. It's like, whoa, and you're going, oh, Marty, you made that up. No, I didn't. Stuff happens like that all the time. We were the poor guys. He helped us out. And JC was a great guy. He had a great life. He was always smiling with a smile on his face. And I think probably one of the reasons is that's because God's continually paying him back for the good that he was doing to other people. Norma, I'm sorry.
Well, as most of you know, I was going up to Kentucky, and I worshiped with a very small congregation there. And there's a little 91-year-old lady, Miss Isabel, and she's totally deaf. But she's there every Sunday morning. And the minister's wife said that she does something for someone every day.
Wow.
And I'm there at my daughter's, and somebody's banging on the front door. It's like they're going to knock the door down, you know? And I go to the door, and there's Miss Isabel with a cake. she couldn't hear, she didn't have any idea how loud she was knocking her.
Yeah.
And I said, well, I heard that you did something for someone every day that you live. She said, if the Lord lets me live, that'll continue.
Wow. Instead of saying, well, I'm deaf, look at what my situation is. I don't have anything to offer anybody. She said, I can make a cake.
She was driving.
Did you say she was
91.
91.
And I walked her out to the car, and I said, now you can drive on around the back of the house and come out, because the street's very, very busy. I was gonna check on that, she said. And I talked real loud, you know.
Wow.
91.
Every now and then you run into somebody who just sets an example like that, and that's why we remember those things. That's why I remember JC. It makes an impact. Any more discussion on this? All right. Everybody said, no, we discussed too much last week. We're not saying a word tonight. There's a passage in John chapter 13 that I want you to take a look at and just consider. And this is supposition on my part, but you look at it and you think what you want to think about it and see if there's anything going on here. Remember John 13. This is the famous text that tells us about Jesus washing the apostles' feet. Where were they when he did this? They were in the upper room. This is the time of the Passover. Supper being ended, he girded himself with a towel, got a bowl of water, washed their feet. So that's John 13. But it says, verse 27, after the morsel, Satan then entered into him. Therefore Jesus said to him, what you do, do quickly. Now, no one of those reclining at the table knew for what purpose he had said this to him. For some were supposing, because Judas had the money box, that Jesus was saying to him, buy the things we have need of for the feast, or else that he should give something to the poor. Why do you think they supposed that Jesus may have told him to give something to the poor?
He's done it before.
That's what I'm thinking. That's why they would suppose, well, he's probably done this before, is what I'm thinking, and that's why they had that supposition in their minds when he was speaking to Judas, who had the money box. Oh, he's probably telling him to go get something for the poor or provide something for the feast that we have here. I don't know that, but I just found that interesting in regards to this study.
Marty,
Yes.
they wouldn't have been privy to the fact that Satan had entered into Judas, only Christ would have been.
Right.
But his example was what you do, you go do quickly. And that had been given to the poor before, so there's two senses here. First of all, he's going to betray Christ, and Christ knows it. And he wants him to do it quickly because Satan is going to tempt him to do it. And yet, the examples he set forth for his apostles who were not aware of that situation is to give to the poor, which they thought he told them, go give to the poor. Do what you do quickly, and give to the poor. Because that had to be an example he had there.
That's what I'm thinking. It also reminds me of that joke about the guy who hadn't read his Bible in years, and he said, I should repent. I need to read my Bible, and whatever it says to me, that's what I'm going to do. So he flipped his Bible open, and he read the passage where it said Judas went and hung himself. And he said, oh, man, I can't do that. So he flipped back a few pages, and it said, what thou doest, do quickly. And so he said, oh, man, I'm in trouble now. But anyway, doesn't really have anything to do with our study, does it? Acts chapter 11. Acts chapter 11. I need somebody to read 27 through 30. Acts 11, 27 to 30. Who wants to do a little reading? Great, Will.
11, 27, 30?
Yes.
27 through 30. During this time, some prophets came down from Jerusalem to Antioch. One of them, named Agabus, stood up and through the Spirit predicted that a severe famine would spread over the entire Roman world. This happened during the reign of Claudius. The disciples, each according to his ability, decided to provide help for the brothers living in Judea. This they did, sending their gift to the elders by Barnabas and Saul.
Very good. Where are they?
Jerusalem?
They went down from Jerusalem to Antioch. Jerusalem was at a higher elevation than Antioch. That's why it says they went down to Jerusalem or down to Antioch. By the way, anytime you see that in Scripture, it's accurate, which is unique to the Bible as far as ancient documents go. There are no other ancient documents that are so geographically accurate as the Bible. It's something we might read and just kind of gloss over, but those who study ancient documents know, oh, okay, the Bible's unique in this way. When it says down, it's down. When it says up, it's up. So, they went down to Antioch. What happened when they were in Antioch? How'd they find out about this famine? Agabus, who was what's it say Agabus was? A prophet. What's a prophet? A prophet is someone who speaks as a mouthpiece for God. It's not just someone who speaks or preaches or, what's the word? Starts with a P. Pontificates. It's someone who actually speaks as if God were speaking. God gives them words to speak. So Agabus is saying, God is saying through Agabus rather, and it says that through the Spirit, that there would certainly be a great famine over all the world. It hadn't happened yet, but it was going to. That's what Agabus is saying. So, what do the apostles command the church to do? Did they command them anything? They didn't command them anything. It says, verse 29, in the proportion that any of the disciples had means, each of them, my translation has the word determined. What does that mean?
They made their mind up.
They made their mind up. They had a plan. Let's premeditate this. We know there's going to be a famine because the prophet said so. We've not been ordered or commanded to send them something to help, but since we know it's coming, we're being told that this is what they did. And I'm looking at this thinking, wow, the church is fantastic. God's people are good. They've always been good. They're still good. This congregation is good. When a need arises and this congregation is made aware of it, this congregation gives. You've always impressed me like that. Proud of this family because you are just like these guys. And they determined to send according to the proportion that they could afford a contribution for the relief of the brethren living in Judea. Pretty neat, huh? I have to wonder, why would God inspire Luke to write this little piece of history in here for us if he didn't want that to influence this in some way? And it's not like he wrote this, told us about this, and then he says, now here's a command for you. He didn't do that. He just gave us the example. And I think this is an inspiring example. These are things we've looked at in the New Testament. Let's go back and check and see just a couple of things in the Old Covenant that the Jews were supposed to do. Leviticus chapter 19. Leviticus 19. I believe in welfare programs that are well run. And I don't mean that as some kind of a caveat or an excuse. I really believe that we ought to be seeing to people's welfare. I think that's what the Bible teaches us. Harold brought this up last week. The fact that when we pay our taxes, we are paying our government to do a certain amount of welfare type work to help the poor. There were no welfare programs in the day that Leviticus was written that are written about in history. So this is it. Leviticus 19. Somebody read verses 9 and 10 for us. Who will do that? Leviticus 19, 9 and 10. Will?
When you reap the harvest of your land, do not reap to the very edges of your field or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Do not go over your vineyard a second time or pick up the grapes that have fallen. Leave them for the poor and the alien. I am the Lord your God.
All right. What are they supposed to do?
Leave leftovers.
Leftovers. Leftovers of what?
Fruit and grain.
How hard do you suppose it was to farm in this day? We don't know much about farming today, do we? How many of you have a garden? Anybody got a garden? I know a bunch of people have gardens. I love people that have gardens. Try to get real close to people that have gardens. It's great when the vegetables come in the boxes and we can just swarm around them out there. It's usually something like hot peppers that are going to really set you on fire. But whatever it is, it's always good. I say that because I'm not really much of a hand at growing anything. I walk through the woods and plants die. So, but these people, had to work hard to raise a crop. You had to break ground. You had to fertilize the ground if it wasn't already fertile, and it likely wasn't that fertile. You had to make sure it was watered. You had to protect it. This is why in the New Testament, when Jesus tells parables, he reads about a guy who built a vineyard, and what did he build with that vineyard? He built a tower, because you have to have a guard in your tower to make sure somebody doesn't get in and steal all your stuff. So it had to be protected until the crop could be harvested, and then everything was done manually. No machines, no John Deeres, no harvesters. It was hard work. But Jesus, I say Jesus because Jesus was here as well. God, through his Holy Spirit and his Son, taught the people, when you reap your harvest that you've worked so hard for, what are you supposed to do? Leave some of it. Exactly how much?
Didn't tell you.
It doesn't tell you. What does it say?
Just don't go to the edges.
Leave the corners.
Don't go over the side.
Now you could, since it says corners or edges, especially if you're thinking in terms of corners, assuming you have a field that has a corner. I'm an angular guy. I think in terms of, well, of course, everybody's field was rectangular. We all know that, right? But if you have a rectangular field, the corners could be from the middle of the width line to the middle of the length line. That would be a full corner. Doesn't have to be that, because that's not what it said. It just said corners. It could be just 3 feet in from the corner. But God left it up to everybody's judgment how much of a corner you were going to leave. And those corners were left for those who didn't have fields of their own. Interesting to me that they had this. Now, what did God not say to do with that corner? I think this is interesting too.
He didn't say withhold it from anybody, he said give it.
Okay, we know that. He also did not command anybody, you harvest those corners and you wrap them up and you take them around to distribute them to whoever's poor. How did this stuff get to the poor? The poor came and got it. I like what somebody said. It's not exactly scripture, but I think it goes hand in hand with this. So just like Jesus said, God feeds the birds, the fowls of the air, but he doesn't throw the food in the nest. You see those little birds outside? What are they doing all the time? They're looking for something to eat. And those fat little things find it too. They're good at it. I don't know how they survive the winter, but they do. You talk about something that to me is evidence of God, just watch the birds in the wintertime. It's 20 below outside, and they're sitting there on the tree limbs, all fluffed up and warm. They've had something good to eat. I don't know where they find it, but they do. Deuteronomy, chapter 24. Somebody read 19 through 22. Who would like to do that? Deuteronomy 24, 19 to 22. Any literate person? Okay, Corey.
Do I have to be illiterate?
You already said you were. So.
I volunteered before you said that. When you are harvesting in your field and you overlook a sheaf, do not go back to get it. Leave it for the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow, so that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands. When you beat the olives from your trees, do not go over the branches a second time. Leave what remains for the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow. When you harvest the grapes in your vineyard, do not go over the vines again. Leave what remains for the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt. That is why I command you to do this.
All right. What's the teaching here? What are they supposed to do?
Supposed to leave some for.
You've already worked and wrapped up. You've harvested the sheaf of grain, but you laid it down and you forgot. So what do you do now? You leave it. Even though you've worked for it to raise it and you've worked for it to harvest it, you've bound it up, it's a sheaf, and you've forgotten it, leave it. And you think to yourself, perhaps, what if nobody comes and gets it? Is it wasted if nobody comes and gets it? Why is it not wasted if nobody comes and gets it? Okay, the birds for one thing maybe, but what else?
You did the right thing.
You did the right thing. God knows he left his sheep. Why did he leave his sheep? Because I told him to, and he obeyed me, faithfully obeyed me, even though he didn't know if anybody was coming to get it or not. I need to think about this in those times when I'm questioning myself. Should I give this person what they're asking for? Because it's probably not going to go for what it ought to go for. And I'm not saying this means that we ought to give anybody anything they ask for, no questions asked. I'm saying here's a principle that says, to me, even if it's not done with what you want it to be done or what you want to be done with it, it doesn't mean it's wasted. I don't believe that there's ever anything we do for the Lord that he teaches us to do that goes unrewarded. I know there's nothing that's unnoticed. And this is one of those things where we could say, I don't know if anybody's coming to get this. Our field is the farthest one out. Probably nobody will come out here and get this stuff. So, God said, leave it. You leave it. I also think about the fact that a lot of harvesting was done not by the owners, but by those who were hired by the owners. Do you remember Jesus' parable about those who were hired at different hours of the day to come out and work in the field?
Yes.
You would have to communicate to your workers, guys, this is what I want done. I want us to remember what God said about the poor. I want us to leave the corners of the field. Well, how much corner, Master? Well, here's how I want you to do it. Here's where the line is for this corner. Here's where the line is for this corner. In other words, you have to think this through. You have to make some plans. You have to make some decisions, but you make all those plans, you make all those decisions with faithfulness to God in mind and with a heart towards those who are going to need what you're leaving. And one more time, I'll point out, God didn't say, when you harvest your olives and your grapes, to take a portion of that to the poor. He said, you just leave it. If they need it, they'll have the means one way or another to come and get it. That's what I'm thinking. Well, the bell has rung. Bless your hearts. You were stifled from saying anything tonight for whatever reason. But wasn't that a good discussion last week? I enjoyed that. Enjoyed the night too. Questions, comments, observations?